How are we doing, everybody? It's great to see you guys this morning. Thank you so much for joining us as we are in another day, day 17, through the book of Hebrews. After today, we will only have 2 weeks to go in this study together. And we've covered 9 chapters so far. And by the end of the day, we'll have covered 9 full chapters in 17 days. In the last 14, we're only going to cover 4 chapters. The last 4 chapters are just so full and so rich of good stuff. Not that the entire book isn't, but the final arguments, everything that was being made in these chapters are setting up the main argument that comes in chapter 12. And so hang in there as we continue through this journey. It's been fun joining with you every single morning, spending time in the Word, and I've been thankful for the way you guys have been interacting with me, asking questions. So just stay in there with us, hang in there with us, and we'll enjoy this time together. Today we are going to be reading from Hebrews chapter 9, verses 15 to the end of the chapter, specifically to verse 28 as it closes out chapter 9. And to recap exactly where we are in the book of Hebrews. So in establishing that the argument that Jesus is superior, and then chapter 8 was Jesus is now the high priest, and that through the high priest we see yesterday that he offered us, or 2 days ago, that he's offered us a better covenant, one that was better, one that was greater than the covenant of old. He was able to accomplish and fulfill what the other one could not. And then yesterday we saw that new covenant necessitated a new and better sanctuary, and that Jesus has offered us a better sanctuary. Not one that was made by human hands in the wilderness when he was talking about the temple that was, or the tent that was made in Exodus 25 to 27, or the different rituals that were required in Leviticus 4 that took place within that temple. And today we're going to see that better covenant that necessitates a better sanctuary, that sanctuary necessitates a better sacrifice. So Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15 to the end of the chapter. If you have your Bible, I just encourage you to read along with me. It says, "Therefore, he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who's made it is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of the calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people. This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded you. And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. And indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered not into a holy place made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly as the high priest enters the holy places every year with blood not of his own. For then he would have to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once and for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who eagerly wait for him." So the new covenant that was brought necessitated a new sanctuary, and that new sanctuary necessitated a new and better sacrifice. Not one that was brought daily, brought yearly by men who were defiled themselves by sin, but one that was brought by an undefiled, stainless, spotless sacrifice made by one who was stainless and spotless himself. And Jesus came to offer a better sacrifice. And we talked about yesterday that we now have this redemption through his blood, that we've now been redeemed, we've been liberated, but it came because of the bloodshed that he had for us. That's why it says in verse 22, everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness of sins. That an innocent sacrifice had to be made so that we could be innocent. Something innocent and spotless had to die to take away the sins of many. And it wasn't a ram, it wasn't a goat, it was Jesus, the final sacrifice made by himself. made by one who did not have sin, but he himself became sin, as Paul wrote. I love what it says in verse 15. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant. He's the one who has given it to us. He has delivered this to us so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Since a death has occurred that redeems them through the transgressions committed under the first covenant. That we have been redeemed from our transgressions. We have been restored. We have been made new because of the blood that was poured out for us. And we now have a promised eternal inheritance waiting for us because of what he has done as a sacrifice. Let's jump forward to verse 23. Thus, it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified. So what he's saying there is that in the Old Testament, if you go back and read Exodus and Leviticus, the priests not only enter the temple daily and yearly. When they entered into that tent, when they entered into the temple, they had to cleanse and purify everything. They would take the blood that was spilled out on the altar and dip it, and they would throw the blood on the walls, on the temple itself, on the tent, even on themselves to purify themselves. And when it says when Moses got the law from God, when he got the commands of God, he purified the commands itself, but also purified the people with the blood. He was throwing blood on them. And so he was purifying not only the people, he was purifying the presence. He was purifying the tent itself, the sanctuary itself. That he came, the sacrifices were made to purify all things. That's why I said almost all things were purified with blood. And I'll be honest, it made me laugh quite a bit because I started thinking about it, because right now the church staff at FBCW are talking about what is it like to come back to church. And we're talking about how do we protect everybody, how do we enforce different things. And when I was reading through this passage, I thought, you know what, we're gonna have to do the same thing. We're gonna have to purify our building when we come back into worship, And so we're not gonna sacrifice a goat or a bull and throw blood on the walls. We're gonna be sacrificing a lot of cans of Purell and Lysol and spraying everything down. So it really made me laugh, and maybe that's immature of me, but it just really kind of got me tickled a little bit that when we enter into that sanctuary again, we're going to have to purify everything with not the blood of goats, but with the can of Lysol. But he's showing us here that not only were the people of God themselves defiled, but all things were defiled. All things required purification. All things required purification because they were inviting the presence of God to dwell amongst them. And now God is offering us to dwell among him in his heavenly sanctuary, that better sanctuary. It itself does not need purification. But those of us who will enter into it will. That's why he says these heavenly things will need purification themselves. He's not saying that heaven needs purified. Heaven itself is pure, holy. But we, the ones who are going there, who have been delivered, who have been liberated, who have accepted and believed and are staying true and holding fast our confession, will need to be purified. And that's what Jesus came to do. He came to cleanse us. He came to purify our hearts. He came to purify our minds. And he's not doing it daily. He's not doing this sacrifice daily. If he was doing this sacrifice daily, he would have been doing it from the beginning of time, from the foundations of the earth, repeatedly, over and over again. It says he's offered this sacrifice once and for all. It says, but as it is, he appeared once and for all at the end of the ages. What does that mean? That at the right time, as Paul wrote in one of his letters, at the right moment, Jesus came and died. At the climax of human history, when things were at its worst and it was necessary, Jesus came and he offered himself as a sacrifice for us. And at that moment, as he stepped out of the tomb and ascended into heaven, that began the end of the age. People think, are we in the end times? Well, yes, technically we are, because we've always been since the day Jesus left. And because of that, we see two different promises here. One of the things that says here, for Christ has entered not only into the holy places made with hands, which are copies of true things, I skipped, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God, listen to this, on our behalf. So the first thing that you want to hear here today is that Jesus right now is appearing before God on your behalf, as your high priest, mediating for you, pleading for you. He's working for you, making you new, making you clean, purifying you with his blood that was poured out for you once and for all. And then the second thing, So not only do we have that confidence that he is there pleading for us on our behalf, the second thing is actually in the very last verse. So, last two verses. So, just as appointed for man to die once, after that comes judgment. So Christ, have been offered up once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who eagerly are waiting for him. So not only do we have confidence that Jesus is right there at the throne of God, pleading for us, mediating for us, we also have a confidence as we eagerly wait in anticipation for him to come back a second time, not to deal with our sin. Again, he's already dealt with our sin, but to save us and bring us to our heavenly dwelling. He came to lead us into the dwelling and presence of God. That's what he came to do, to make a way when there was no way, to offer up a sacrifice when we could not offer up ourselves. And the blood of Christ has forgiven us, has liberated us, and redeemed us so that when this life ends, or when Jesus comes to take us home, we will step into eternity, into that dwelling place of God, and enjoy him for all eternity. So, my question for you to think about today: 1, do you know and trust that Jesus right now is pleading for you on your behalf? That he's made a sacrifice once and for all for you. Do you realize that Jesus has done all the things that you couldn't do so that you can have eternity with the Father? Do you want to believe that? If you want to believe that for the first time, I encourage you to text me or send me a private message. I would love to chat with you. The second thing, are you eagerly waiting in anticipation that Jesus could come back tomorrow, today, the second? Jesus is coming back. He's coming back, and God will send him when things are ready, when the time is right, and we will enter into eternity with him. But I don't know about you, but I want to make sure, not that I'm ready, because I'm ready because of the blood of Jesus, and I'm ready to step into eternity, but I want to make sure that when he comes back, I am being obedient. What do you want to be doing when Christ comes back? What do you want to be doing when Christ brings you home? I hope and pray that you are being faithful and obedient at that moment. And I want to encourage you to think about that throughout your day today.